it's too cavalier to say we can't explain it, but yet there is something magical about saying, just think. And I think what is most remarkable about what T.K. Coleman does is he brings that idea to a very personal level. And I think we've watched him be extremely effective with the students, and that is the magic. And I want to introduce T.K. and say that he has a minimalist podcast that's extremely popular. He's the Director of Entrepreneurial Education at the Foundation for Economic Education. He creates workshops and programs designed to teach the value of economic literacy, and I'd say also economic competence and entrepreneurial thinking. He was recently featured in the Netflix documentary Less Is Now. His passion is helping young audiences elevate their aspirations and sense of agency to create and persevere in their individual journeys to live flourishing lives of meaning, achievement, and happiness. So it's my honor to introduce and thank TK. I also want to say that you'll see tonight the demonstration of collaboration. Last night we went to dinner and we learned for the first time that TK is a total carnivore. That's all he eats. And Natalie Simon is a vegetarian. And we somehow found that it was a little bit, it reminded me of the Oklahoma, the cowman and the cowboy. I mean, the farmer and the cowboy can be friends. And I think this will be a good demonstration of that. So TK, welcome. We're honored to have you speak tonight.
Thank you so much for that, Jay. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
Excellent. Are we really doing great? Everybody's great?
Yes.
Hey, that's fantastic. That's good. I like that. This morning with the students, I said, how's everyone doing? And they said, good. I said, really? And they were like, no. I said, okay, how we doing? They're like, tired, sleepy, hungry. What's wrong with that? That's where we are. That's where we are. But good is good too. It's good to be here tonight. I'm excited about this. I'm not going to waste any time with any bios or boring information about myself. I'll definitely make some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions for me, nothing's off limits. Feel free to ask. I'm excited to engage you about the things that we discussed tonight or about whatever is on your heart and mind, regardless of what I talk about. I'll begin with a little story. I told the students this morning about myself, and it'll be a little window into my background and also a segue into the themes that we'll discuss tonight. So when I was young, I had an intense fear of the dark. By show of hands, how many can relate to that? How many had a fear of the dark before? All right. Well, my fear of the dark was based specifically on my older brother. He worked second shift, and that was from 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock at an assisted living facility. And on his way home each night, he would stop and get some fast food, and he would come in, and he would sit in the kitchen, and he would eat his fast food at about 11:30 p.m., and he would watch horror movies, like the top cinematic classics, like Child's Play, 1, 2, and 3, Friday the 13th, 1 through however many of those things there were. And the way the house was structured, my parents, their bedroom was in the back of the house. So whenever they would hear Lamar come in, and they would know that he was all right, they would be fine, and they would go to sleep. My room was in the front of the house, right by the kitchen, where he would watch the movies, and I heard everything. So my nights were filled with the sweet, soothing sounds of and there's something paradoxical about horror, because on one end, it really frightens you, but at the same time, it captures that sense of intrigue. There's something about the story of the person walking down the long corridor. What's going to happen? Sometimes I would imagine myself to be that man. I would get up, and I would creep over to my door, and I would listen and see what happens. I'm so scared, but I'm also so curious. And sometimes my brother would hear me listening, and he'd call me out, but he'd let me sit next to him, and I could watch a horror movie with him. And it was so fun watching these scary movies next to my big brother, because it's easy to be brave when you're surrounded by a pack of wolves to defend you. But then the movie would end, he would throw his trash in the garbage, and he would go downstairs to where his bathroom was, and I would be all alone on one end of the house, and that's when the real horror movie began. And so, to solve this problem, I had the brilliant idea of sleeping with my lights on. And so my mom, she would sometimes get up in the middle of the night, go get a glass of water, and she'd see the light on, she'd come to my room, and she'd turn it off. And then I'd wait a little bit until I hear her footsteps recede into the distance, and I'd turn the light back on. And sometimes, as she started to wise up especially, she would come back in the kitchen, she'd see the light on, she'd turn it on, I'd wait a little bit longer, I got smart too, and I hear the door close, and then I turned the light back on. And we went back and forth. And I was a real nuisance to my mom over this little light issue until one day my grandfather decided to intervene. He comes into my room one night and he says, "Boy, you know your mama wants you to turn those lights off." I said, "I know." "Well, why don't you do it?" "I'm scared." Okay? When I was your age, I was afraid of the dark too. I understand. "What are you afraid of?" "Something's gonna get me." I understand. "I'll tell you what, I'll make you a promise." And as soon as he said those words with the confidence and the empathy that only a grandfather could have, I immediately felt relief. I knew my problems were beginning to end. What could this promise be? Perhaps he would make an arrangement with my mother that she would allow me to sleep with the light on until I was 18. Or maybe he would personally come and sit on the bed next to me until I fell asleep every night to ensure that I was safe from the monsters. But he had an even better promise. He said, "I don't think that any monsters are going to come into this house and do anything to you. But if they do, I promise you this, that they're going to find you first, because with that light on, they won't have any trouble figuring out where you are." And at that moment, a light bulb went on in my head, and the light bulb in my room went off, and I was forever cured of my fear of the dark. True story, a window into my past. But it's also relevant to today's thing, because the moral of my story is that sometimes the things that we think we need to do in order to insulate ourselves or protect ourselves from the very things that we believe will harm us are the things that actually put us in harm's way and make us the most vulnerable. And I would contend that civil discourse, as we engage it today, as we conceptualize it today, as we react and respond to it today, is the modern day boogeyman. Freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is scary. So many beautiful things have come from it. All of the art that we love, all of the ways that we can distinguish ourselves from one another, by our clothes, our style, our accessories, all the little things that we do are the direct result of this beautiful gift that we have called freedom. And yet, freedom is tremendously scary. It's sort of like Aslan, the High King of Narnia. In the story by C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you have this group of children who visit their uncle during World War II, and they're playing a game of hide and seek, and some of the kids decide to go hide in the wardrobe. And unbeknownst to them, this is a magical wardrobe. And one of the kids is going back into the wardrobe, and this thing is deep, and he goes back, and he goes back, and he goes back, and eventually he realizes that this wardrobe is a portal to another world, a magical realm called Narnia. And in this realm, there's an age-old prophecy that one day, 4 little children will enter the realm of Narnia through wardrobe, and they would become the future kings and queens of Narnia. But right now, Narnia is under the tyrannical reign of the great wicked witch, the queen of Narnia. And they say it's always winter and never Christmas in Narnia because she rules with her cold, calloused heart. But one day the High King Aslan will come, and he will liberate the people, and he will crown these children as the kings and queens. And so there's a conversation between one of the little girls named Lucy and one of the enchanted creatures of Narnia about the goodness of Aslan. And as he's describing Aslan with all these beautiful qualities, the little girl says, "Aslan, he sounds amazing. Now, is he scary though? He seems a little frightening." And the character says, "Oh yeah, he's very scary. No one has ever stood in his presence without wavering in fear." And Lucy says, "Oh, I was hoping he'd be good, but he doesn't sound safe." And the character says, "Safe? Who said anything about safe? He's not safe at all, but he is good." I would contend That is what's true of freedom of expression. It is incredibly frightening. It is incredibly dangerous. It is the source of many problems, and it requires a tremendous amount of responsibility. And it's very easy to misuse and abuse. It's very easy to wound people with this gift, and yet it's necessary. It's good, and it is the basis for everything in life that is good. And it's frightening. And because it's frightening, we tend to do like I did with my fear of monsters. We look for anything other than confrontation. And we come up with various coping mechanisms to protect us from what we think can harm us. And so we retreat into suppression. We say, well, I won't say what I believe. I will not have any conversations about these topics if it begins with an R, if it begins with politics. I won't have any discussions about those things because I will keep the peace. Because we're afraid. Somewhere along the way, someone made up this idea, it's a completely made up idea, that you should never talk about religion and politics to the people that you love. And it just got passed down from generation to generation, and now we treat that like a literal axiom of logic. It's just something that you can't do. And so we're frightened, we're scared. Kids come home from college, and there are certain topics that are off limits, and that's how we protect ourselves from the harm that can be caused by this frightening, dangerous thing called freedom of expression. Or maybe another coping mechanism, we retreat into relativism. Deep down inside, we don't truly believe it, but we tell ourselves things like, oh, all ideas are basically the same. No opinion matters. One idea is just as good as the other. And instead of being elitist on ideas and egalitarians with people, we become egalitarians with ideas. And we start to treat ideas like, oh yeah, one person's ideas about how to treat a human being are better than just anybody else's. And when we do that, we undermine the basis for learning. We undermine the basis for dialogue. If one idea is just as good as another, why learn anything? To learn, to talk and dialogue, to study, to think critically, presupposes that a refined idea, that a critically thought idea, that a well-formed idea is better than one that is not well-formed, better than one that is unrefined, better than one that is well thought out. An improved idea is better than an unproved idea. A tested, scrutinized idea is better than an untested, unscrutinized idea. A rationally held idea, a consistently practiced idea, is better than an irrationally held idea. But if all ideas are equal, no need to learn, just keep the ones you have because they're just as good as the ones you would have if you studied a little bit, if you thought about it a little bit. Relativism undermines the basis for dialogue, the basis for critical thinking, the basis for personal growth, but it makes us feel safe because if I don't have any beliefs anymore, if I don't have any opinions anymore, then I have nothing with which to offend you. I never have to answer any hard questions. TK, do you like this? Oh, well, one idea is as good as the other. I never have to take the risk of doing that which is intrinsically offensive. You know what that is? It's called having a personality. And so we run from that, and we make ourselves cookie cutters. We make the goal of life to live and one day die so that people can say, here lies a person that caused no one any trouble. That's what we make life about. And when we do that, something really tragic occurs. Because freedom of speech, freedom of expression, is not just about someone else's right to use mean words that make you feel bad. It's really about the right to do what makes us most uniquely human. And that's to express ourselves creatively. That's to look at the world and say, I will not accept this world as it is presented to me as some sort of fixed, static, permanent, unchanging thing. I will not accept this universe as some sort of closed system. Instead, I choose to look at this world as a place where possibilities can be negotiated. I choose to look at this world as a place that can accommodate my vision, my dreams, my creative impulses. If I learn how to work with my potential, work with my talents, work with the people around me, work with ideas, work with the principles of nature, and so on. My existence counts because I have the ability to leave this world differently than it was when I got here. That's what life's about. And that's what freedom of expression is about. And you take that away, you take everything else away as well. There are many good things in life. And we can all quibble about what's good and what's not. But you've got your ideas of good, I've got my idea of good. But the one good upon which all forms of good depends is freedom. Because what is vice and what is virtue if I can't hold you accountable for your actions? And you can't hold me accountable for my actions. The very thing that makes virtue possible, the very thing that makes a person's behavior praiseworthy, the very thing that makes it possible for me to say, hey man, I really appreciate you because no matter what the situation is, you always exhibit punctuality. You're always the first one there. Hey, I really appreciate you because no matter what, you always find something good to say about other people and you always help other people get involved. What's the point of praising virtue if people are just automatons who don't have the capacity to choose things? That's what makes it virtue. And that's what gives us the right to call people out when they exhibit vices. Because I can hold you responsible because you're an agent. You have the capacity to do otherwise, but yet you chose to do that. Without accountability, without culpability, vice and virtue disappear, and freedom is the foundation for that. And so freedom is the ultimate good because all conversations about good and bad go right out the window when we give up freedom. But yet every generation faces the temptation to look at freedom in the face and say, I love you, and I know that I can't make it without you, but you really frighten me, and I don't know if I can handle you. And what I want to say to you is that freedom of expression is about so much more than political issues. Are political issues important? Yes. Are sociological discussions important? Absolutely. Do our economic opinions matter? You bet it does. But you know what? Every single day, you're going to have someone shoving down your throat ideas about what you should be angry about, ideas about what you should be upset about, or what you should be worried about. This world isn't going to let you get away without doing some thinking about politics. You're going to think about politics whether you like it or not, because it's going to get shoved down your throat by every source of information you consume, because that's the politically obsessed world we live in. But here's an aspect of freedom of expression that isn't going to get shoved down your face, and that is, this isn't just about the future of our nation. This isn't just about our economy. This isn't just about the civil liberties in America. This is also about your individual flourishing and your individual freedom and mine and the next generation. Because every dream we have, every desire that we have is an economic demand that we make on the world. There is nothing that we can make happen in this world that doesn't require the ability to incentivize other people to cooperate with us, to collaborate with us. And that means we got to figure out a way to connect with people, to deal with them, to put up with them, to navigate the complexities involved in interacting with them. Now, when I made this statement in one classroom, I had a student say, hey, for me, I just want to be left alone. I don't really care about people. I don't want to do anything that involves people. So what about me? I says, oh, well, you have to be better with people than all the rest of us, because that's literally the hardest thing to achieve in life, to be left alone. We live in a world where nobody wants to leave you alone. And so if that's your goal, you've got to be really, really good with people. But this isn't just about the nation. It's about you, and it's about I, and it's about everyday life. Everything that we want depends on our ability to cultivate the courage and the creativity to participate in difficult discussions. It happens at every level of life. It can happen with your children. It can happen with your spouse. It can happen with your coworkers and your colleagues. It can happen when you're casting a vote or telling a friend who you did or didn't vote for. It can also happen when you're asking for a raise, or when someone's asking you for a raise and you don't think they create enough value to warrant that raise. It can happen if someone is playing the music too loud, or you're sitting on the airplane and someone's kicking it back in your seat. The difference between your quality of life and absolute misery is your willingness to take the risk of asking tough questions, trying to answer difficult questions, even if there's a risk that you might be wrong, dialoguing with people who think differently than you, listening to people who say things that you have been taught are stupid and that deep down inside you feel are stupid, listening to them, trying to understand, not in the name of virtue signaling or trying to appear to be a saint, Because oftentimes, to actually become a saint, you have to be willing to sacrifice your need to look like one. But it's about being willing to participate in those difficult conversations. And if we don't learn to do that in our own lives, we won't model it for the next generation. Because the most powerful forms of knowledge are not the ones that we explicitly teach to them in the form of lecturing or teaching in classrooms. The most powerful forms of knowledge are what philosophers call tacit knowledge, knowledge that's culturally transmitted. When you get angry, how do you act? How does that anger show up in your body? You may not tell it to your kids, but they watch you and they learn how to be angry from you. When you disagree with someone, do you yell? Do you raise your voice? Do you insult? You may not tell your children or the people around you, this is how you act when you disagree with someone, but they pick it up. How do you work a room? How do you exit a room? How do you show up at work? How do you treat yourself? How do you respond when you make a mistake? Someone else makes a mistake. Most of these things are things that we pick up behaviorally without anyone ever telling us, hey, this is what you do when you feel joy. This is what you do when someone challenges you. This is what you do when you fell at something. And then all the lecture knowledge, all the explicitly conveyed knowledge is kind of like a layer on that. Some of that goes through, but a lot of it just goes right out the window. But it's what we embody for them. And so if we don't model this in our own lives, we won't be able to give this as a gift to the next generation. I was on a radio show today, and one of the questions posed, the host said that he was talking with a young man, and he said to him, it was a young black man, and he says, hey, I want to know from you, what do you think we, the older generation, could have done better? And he says, I feel like we just inherit the same problems from you all. I feel like the things we complain about and the things that upset us are the same things you complain about and the things that upset your generation. And it just feels like y'all handed us a lot of burdens, but you didn't really hand us any tools or any advantages with which to fight those burdens. And in that conversation, we began to have conversations about generational wealth, what it means to create a legacy, the importance of economic literacy in black communities and different things like that. But what really struck me about that young man's gripe, or rather about his complaint, his honest answer to the question that was posed to him is, what do we want our legacy to be with the next generation? When we say to them, where do we fail you? Do we want them to say, in the way you showed up for yourself, in the way you failed to use your voice, in the way you failed to speak up, in the way you failed to allow yourself to be challenged? Is that the legacy we want to have? Or do we want our children saying, you know what? I've learned that if you believe something, you say it. If you're in a discussion and you're wrong, you admit it. If you don't understand something, you simply admit it and you ask a question, no matter what else anybody else in the room thinks. If you want something, you go after it and you own it. That's what I learned from my dad. That's what I learned from my aunt. That's what I learned from my grandmother. Is that the kind of legacy you want to have? So I want to talk a lot about entrepreneurship, and that's the vantage point that I come from with a lot of the things I do. And so I want to talk about an entrepreneurial approach to freedom of expression in general, but how to embody the principles of liberty when it comes to this idea in everyday life and how that can impact the culture. So I'll begin with a story that we can interact over a little bit. So, fictional story here. There's a young banker who is walking to work one day. And as he's walking to work, he passes by this guy who's like selling trinkets out of a cart, right? And he sees the young man. He says, young man, I have something for you. And the young banker thinks, oh no, I'm in a rush. I really don't have time. He says, no. He says, this here, I'm not asking for you to buy anything, but I'm trying to give you something. This here will change your life. And he holds up a penny. And the young guy thinks, what's with this old man? And he says, you know what, I'll just humor him, or otherwise he'll keep nagging me. So he goes up to him, and he takes the penny, and he puts it in his pocket, and he goes on his way. And as he's walking to work, he hears the voice of a man that he's passing by say, who told you to put on those clown shoes? And he turns to the guy and he says, hey, what's with the comment about my shoes? And the guy's face turns red, and he says, what? I I didn't say anything to you. And the guy with the penny goes, yeah, right. Nobody's willing to be a tough guy and own their opinions anymore. And so he keeps on walking. And as he's walking, he walks past a woman who says, where does he work, at the circus with those shoes? And he turns to the woman and he says, why is everyone making fun of my shoes today? She turns red as if she has been caught. And she says, I didn't say anything. And she scurries off. And he says, that's so weird. I mean, the first guy, it's like I'm here. And a strange thought occurs to him. He realizes that this penny he has been given is a magic penny that confers upon him the ability to read other people's minds. It turns out that all he has to do is look at a person, and he can see exactly what they're thinking. So he goes to work, and he looks at one guy, and he can see, oh, okay, Bob is fantasizing about being at the beach rather than being at work today. Ha ha ha. Oh, okay, Jimmy's thinking about what he's going to have for lunch. Oh, Sally's still angry at the boss for that criticism he gave her last week. And it's all fun and games until he looks in the corner and he sees an employee that has been working there for a couple of decades, an older man named Joseph, and he hears the following inner monologue. I've been working at this bank for 20 years, and no one has ever shown me any respect. Well, today's the day. I'm going to teach them a lesson. During my lunch break, I'm going to grab my little book and my little bag, and I'm going to go into the vault like I usually do. And people are going to say, oh, there goes old man Joe, all by his lonesome to sit in the vault and eat his lunch and read his book. But this time, it's going to be different. I'm going to go into the vault, and I'm going to put some money in my bag. And by the time anyone realizes what's going on, I will be on a one-way flight to Europe. And that'll teach them not to leave a hard-working employee unappreciated. What? The guy with the magic penny thinks to himself, I gotta do something about this. And so he runs to the manager and he says, hey, you gotta listen to me. I was on my way to work today. I passed by this guy selling trinkets out of the cart. He calls me over and he gives me a penny. I think nothing of it. I put the penny in my pocket, but then as I start walking, I start hearing voices. I thought I was losing my mind, but I realized I got a magic penny and I got the ability to read other people's minds. I come to work, it's all fun and games. Sally's fantasizing about this, Jimmy's fantasizing about that. But then when I looked at Joe, he's thinking to himself that he's gonna rob the bank. We gotta do something. Pause the story here. Question. What do you think the manager's reaction to this story was? Before you answer, let me make it clear as to what I am not asking. I'm not asking what would you do if you were the manager. I'm not asking what should the manager do. I'm not asking if the guy with the penny should have done something other than run to the manager. But as a matter of prediction, what do you think the manager's reaction was?
That he was crazy.
That he was crazy. Tell me more.
Well, I mean, if anybody would come to me and say that, they'd say, get the hell out, get out of my face.
Yeah.
Steal the penny.
Yeah.
You think the manager would do that? That's your prediction, or that's what you're saying you would do?
Managers are leaders. Leaders lead.
So is that what you think the manager did in the story?
I snag the penny like that.
All right, so I want to come back to you because I do want to hear your ideas about what you would do. But is that what you think the manager in this story does?
Absolutely, make a great story.
All right, so the manager steals the penny. Yep.
I was wondering if the manager were to ask him why he's wearing clown shoes. Was he wearing clown shoes? Were people thinking that he was wearing clown shoes?
I think people would just thought his shoes looked funny.
Oh,
He thought they were nice.
okay. I thought he might actually be wearing clown shoes.
No, that's a good observation.
Judges.
He judges.
Judges.
Okay. Any else? Any others?
Maybe he has it in for Joseph and wants the manager to look down.
All right. So we got three separate ideas on the table. One is kind of like variations of manager says he's crazy. One is the manager snatches the penny because that's what good leaders do. And the other is hands it to Joseph. I don't know what y'all at. Okay. Option one, by show of hands, hands it to Joseph. 2, he takes the penny. 3, he thinks he's crazy. All right. So those who voted the manager thinks he's crazy. That's what he does. But now I'm confused. Because maybe you missed a couple of key details in the story. I want to run them by you again, and I want you to help me understand why you all voted that way. So first, according to the story, he really does have a magic penny. All right? Also, according to the premise of the story, the old guy is still thinking about robbing the bank. Okay? Also, this guy with the magic penny is literally the only one in the room who really knows what's going on. Okay? And if everybody listens to him, the situation improves. Like, this is what needs to happen. Everybody needs to stop and listen to the guy with the magic penny. He's right. He knows what's happening. So why is that guy crazy? Why does that guy get to be the crazy one?
He should have.
Because nobody will test the penny. Nobody will test the penny. You pick the penny up, put it in your hand, and you test it.
Okay. And so is that why people think he's crazy? That would be a reasonable thing to do, but you all guessed. Your guess was the prediction is he's going to be dismissed as crazy. And so I'm saying, why would you dismiss a guy as crazy when he's the only one in the room that knows what he's talking about?
Because no one believes in magic pennies.
Because no one believes in magic pennies. I guess that's an obvious answer, and so that prompts the following question. Does the story still sound like a fiction story? Does it still sound like something that's happening somewhere else in somebody else's life? Does it still sound like it's a fictional story about a fictional guy with a fictional penny?
Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't hit home yet? This doesn't feel personal yet? Because this is your life I'm describing. You're the guy with the magic penny. You don't see that? Because everyone in your life, everywhere that you work, every place that you go, you're going to observe something called problems. You'll see people struggle. How many of you know someone and you see them like struggling with something and it just seems so simple to you? And you're like, if they just did it this way, if they just asked this question, if they just chilled out a little bit and just went about it like this, they'd be all right. And then you try to help them and they're like, I'm completely unimpressed by your idea. It's easier for me to believe that you are crazy than that you have some insight nobody else has thought of that's going to help my problem. That's you. You're the guy with the magic penny. There's someone somewhere who thinks you are terribly wrong about very important things. There's someone somewhere who thinks that all the conclusions you have drawn about religion, about money, about morality, about family are so strange, are so otherworldly, that the only theory they can come up with for why someone would believe all the things you believe is that some people are just crazy. There's someone out there that literally thinks that of you and your worldview, and mine as well. You're the guy with the magic penny. I'm the guy with the magic penny. And so is everyone that ever seeks to create change, to solve problems, or to positively influence the life of another human being. That's you and I. And so the question is, when you have those moments, not if, but when you have those moments where the world responds to your ideas, your input, your insight, as if you are crazy, as if your ideas are just too otherworldly to be believed, what are you going to do in that moment? How are you going to respond? Because that is what's going to define your legacy. So now, back to the guy with the magic penny. So I'm going to go to you because you were ready for this. What are some things we could do if we could enter the story and play consultant to the guy with the magic penny to help him solve this problem without being cast out of the business, without being dismissed as crazy? And I want to hear your idea now. Let's talk about it. Snatch the penny. Talk to me.
Well, the point of the matter is you got to share the penny. So instead of hoarding it for yourself, you say, manager, here is the magic penny. If you pick it up and you go test Susie and you go test Jimmy and you go test the old man in the corner, you may experience the same thing I did. In which case, we have two people agreeing that the penny is real and you dealt with the information given to us. So you don't
I love
offer the penny and tell people, you offer the penny and let them go experience for themselves.
I love it. I love it. You have to understand, if I'm hearing you correctly, that not everyone shares your experience, not everyone shares your perspective, and if you can find a way to facilitate an experience that helps the person see it from your point of view, then you might be able to influence them. Or it's a form of establishing credibility, right? Sometimes people just don't have what they think to be a compelling reason to believe what we're saying. And if we can depersonalize that, not get defensive about that, not look at it as an insult that someone might say, look, I just don't find what you're saying to be very persuasive. Maybe you can argue for it. Maybe you can establish some credibility. Maybe you can show me your track record. Maybe you can substantiate your claim to wisdom. That's an important challenge to be willing to
Tell
meet.
the manager what he's thinking while you're holding the pen.
Absolutely. And by the way, that takes, it looks like, on the surface, it could be like, oh, well, that's a fairly easy thing to do. I got this magic penny. But that takes a tremendous amount of character to do that because the manager has already responded to you like you're crazy. So you can't take that personally. You got to be pretty non-defensive about that. You got to be patient enough and empathetic enough to understand that the reason that the manager is dismissing you as crazy isn't because he doesn't appreciate you as a person or because he doesn't appreciate your work, but you've got to get to a place where you can say his rejection of my idea is reasonable from his point of view, no matter how silly it might be from my point of view. All right, one thing we should do is we should always assume that when someone says something brilliant and they present a solution to the problem, there are probably at least 100 more possibilities. So any other ideas? We got that one. Yes?
I'd go talk to Joe and tell him he's hardworking and that I appreciate him and see if and then with my magic penny, I'd listen and see
Oh,
if
I like that. I like
his
that.
train of thought changes.
Go talk to Joe and ask him how he's doing.
And then I'd talk to the manager if things have changed.
I like that. I like that. Talk to Joe. Hey Joe, hey man, you've been working here for a long time, and I just want to express some appreciation for everything you've done, right? I mean, the guy doesn't feel appreciated, and what you're saying is you can make Joe feel seen, heard. How many people need to believe your magic penny story for that? How many?
Nobody.
This many, right? Nobody needs to believe that magic penny story, right? So there's something interesting there because it turns out that on the surface, it seems that his problem is no one listens to his idea. He's right, but no one listens to his idea. But there's also a failure of imagination going on because his concept of power is so externalized that he believes that power only or primarily takes the form of people with titles, people in positions of authority. And what you do when you see a problem is you run to people with titles. You go find someone in the room that's got positional authority. And then when you find them, you wrangle them into your belief system. And if they don't listen to you, you just don't get to be a player in the game. You get to be frustrated and angry. But if you do get to listen to them, get them to listen to you, then they can go use their flexing ability, their power, their authority to make everybody else behave in the right way, and then we're good. Now, there are a lot of things in life that get done in precisely that way. That is a true form of power that exists in the world. But if that's your only vocabulary for power, you are condemned to a continually frustrating life. But there is another form of power. I think about in the movie Matrix, where the character Morpheus is who's kind of like a more mystical type figure. He's having a conversation with the commander, who's a military guy, very hard-nosed and pragmatic. And the two of them are talking about their different perspectives on what's going to save the city. And at one point, the commander just loses his cool and he's so upset. And he says, Morpheus, not everybody believes in fairies and all of these sorts of things. Not everyone believes as you believe. And Morpheus says, fortunately, my beliefs do not require them to. Now that's a different form of power, isn't it? Have you ever stood in the presence of someone who thought you were irrational, or worse, because of your belief? They didn't just think you were irrational, but they thought that you were a bad person. Have you ever stood in the presence of somebody like that? You're wrong. you're an idiot. And you genuinely were able to convey a level of composure, a level of presence that says, hey, I'm not having this conversation because I'm psychologically dependent upon your agreement. I'm having this conversation because you asked me a question. You invited me to a discussion on ideas, and this is what I believe to be true, and I'm telling you what's true. And if you walk away from this conversation thinking that I'm wrong, thinking that I'm an idiot, and thinking that these ideas are worthless, hey man, that's your choice. My beliefs don't require you to bow down to me. This is what I have to offer, and that's it. And not only that, but I have found a way to live my life to where my capacity to have an influence isn't limited to me winning every argument or even most of the arguments that I have with people who disagree with me. And what you pointed out, going to the man himself gives us a clue of what this form of power could look like. So, quickly, let's speed it up now. Let's talk about another story. 1940s, this one is real. There's an Oklahoma grocer by the name of Sylvan Coleman. He notices this strange pattern. People will come into his grocery store and they'll buy about 4 or 5 items and then they will simply leave. And he thinks to himself, if I don't get people buying more stuff, I'm going to be out of business soon. What's the problem? Why aren't people buying enough things? Any guesses?
Things they most need are up front near the register.
The things they most need are up front near the register. That is a hypothesis worth considering, worth checking out. Kind of thing you would need to do if you are Sylvan Coleman in this situation. Any other guesses?
They needed a basket.
They needed a basket. Bingo. That's the right answer. It turns out that people can only carry about 5 or 6 things on average. And so things get heavy and they start to think, well, maybe I'll come back later, or I'll just get the most important things for now, and they leave. And Sylvan Coleman figured out, if I can find a way to make it more convenient for people to carry things, then I will have solved a very important problem. I will not only make things easier on them, but I will also create more wealth. So, when you go into a grocery store and you see the evidence of his idea, that's Sylvan Coleman. And you know and I know that it was a good idea because it worked. But here's the interesting part. The story didn't end there. Brilliant idea. We can see the evidence today that it worked. And if you look at the history of the architecture of a shopping cart, you find that there is no wide range of sophistication. It's a pretty simple contraption. It's not like we got, screens and smartphones hooked to the shopping carts. It's pretty simple. Shopping cart today is not all that different from 20 years ago and so on. What he did was he had the shopping carts at the entry of the store. People would come in and he would offer them shopping carts and people would say, no thanks. I agree that it's a good idea, you agree, and people said, no thanks, you've been there before? You see that someone's struggling? You've taken the time to do what they're not willing to do, think through, wrestle with complex ideas, and figure out something that could benefit them, and then you share it, and they're like, I'm totally unimpressed by your work. Yeah, your ideas and perspective is not interesting to me at all. I don't really find it useful. And so he says, oh, I know how it works. Never answer a question that people are not asking. Never solve a problem that people don't feel the weight of. I'm going to wait until I see them struggle. And then he sees them struggling, and then he appears with the shopping cart, and they say, no thanks, I'm good. What? How does that happen? That strikes me as pretty irrational. If I'm in that situation, I'm pretty frustrated because I know I'm right. I've seen you struggle. People they just lie to themselves. People are just arrogant. People don't want anything good. People don't want to help. People just want to be stubborn. You can be that way. But here's the difference between politics and entrepreneurship. When it comes to political debate, oh yeah, that really feeds the self-righteousness. You can find people who disagree and think differently, and you can just self-righteously dismiss them as crazy, bigoted, whatever it is you might think. But see, in entrepreneurship, you have that attitude, you get to go out of business because you are accountable to making yourself a student of people so that you can figure them out. And that's very humbling. That's very hard work. I mean, imagine I owned a restaurant. Someone comes into my restaurant and they eat a burger and they say, this burger is terrible. And I said, well, you don't understand burgers. I've been a chef for 20 years. I might be right, but I'm also going to be right out of business. I want to be a comedian. I get on stage. I've got an audience full of people, and I tell a joke, and nobody laughs. And I get offended. I say, I studied at Juilliard. I studied under Jerry Seinfeld. I studied under Chris Rock. I've studied under Steve Harvey. I know comedy. You guys don't know funny. Maybe I'm right. But I don't get to be a comedian with that attitude. And a lot of our political debates afford us that level of unaccountable self-righteousness where we get to be right in this way that is very isolated, untested. And you can tell yourself stories like that. People just don't care about the truth anymore. People just don't listen anymore. People are completely idiotic. And you can tell yourself that story, or you can measure your life by the results. You can measure your life by impact. And those are two fundamentally different approaches to life. I can comfort myself with stories about why I'm not having impact, or I can figure out what I need to figure out so I can have an impact. And that latter path is terribly difficult. I tell people all the time, if you think you understand the ideas of your so-called opponents, here's what I want you to do. If you really think you understand, go to someone who actually believes that and describe to them what you think they believe, and then ask them to verify. Is that a good description of what you believe? And see if they say yes. And if they say no, then say, all right, well, correct me where I'm wrong. And then try again after they correct you. The goal isn't to refute them, but just try to describe what they believe in a way that they will agree with. Most people cannot do that. That's incredibly difficult. How could you ever have influence on anyone if you can't describe to them what they believe in a way they will agree with? But so many people do this. So many people think they know what capitalism is. So many people think they know what socialism is. And they memorize some definition out of a textbook, and on the basis of that and a little social media interaction with people that they've never met, and based on knowing nobody who actually thinks that way, they say, well, this is what they believe. You ever talk to anybody and held yourself to that test and say, I'm going to describe your belief for you, and you tell me if I'm right? And if I'm wrong, tell me where I'm wrong. That's really hard to do. But that's called being a student of humanity. So Sylvan Goldman said, all right, I got to figure people out. I thought I had a good idea, but it's not working. And so he goes to work, and he starts to ask his customers, what's going on? Why are you not using the shopping carts? And after a while, people start to be honest with him. It turns out that the men didn't want to use the shopping carts, surprisingly, because they thought the shopping carts were effeminate. And if you're a man and one of your jobs is to carry things for your wife and your children, you're going to outsource that to a shopping cart? Why are you even there? You're replaced by a shopping cart. No man wants that life, right? And then the women thought the shopping carts resembled baby carriages. There's even a story about one woman who said, I've pushed my last baby carriage. The elderly thought the shopping carts looked like walking aids and made them look weak and feeble. The children thought the shopping carts were unfashionable. And so everybody had a story they were telling themselves that made it psychologically impossible for them to do something that they wanted to do. Use a shopping cart. And because of this story they were telling themselves, they were also incentivized to speak negatively about something that deep down inside they wished they could enjoy the benefits of. That's why you got to be very careful about letting people's hatred or condemnation of a person or an idea have the last word. There's always more going on than the anger that a person exhibits. You can't get anger out of a person unless there's something that they really care about underneath the surface. That's why I tell a lot of students, like, hey, if figuring out your passion is stressing you out, forget about that. What are you angry about? Because if you pay attention to your anger, you'll find that that tells you so much about your values and about your vision for the world. What are you mad at? What are you upset about? So he listened to this, And I'll tell you, the easiest thing that you could do when you hear people say things like that is to just mock their ideas. To just mock the fact that these people can't even do something that they want to do that will benefit them because they're worried about what someone else thinks. But once again, this is the difference between the entrepreneurial mindset and the unaccountable, self-righteous mindset. If you're unaccountable and you're self-righteous and the results don't matter and all that matters is that you get to feel like you're better than everybody else, you can stop right there. Just mock people's story and move on. But does that really make you happy? Do you really enjoy your life? Or does that make you miserable and angry and frustrated all the time? I invite you to another way of power. Sylvan Coleman stepped back and he said, okay, well, I can debate the story that people are telling themselves, or I can figure out a way to present this to them in a way that is reconcilable with that story. And so he gets another idea. He hires models from every demographic, risk his own capital, paying them to push around the shopping carts. Yeah, it takes that, right? It's so silly, right? And it's like trying to get a kid to eat, and you can't get them to eat until you turn the food into an airplane and go, woo, woo, and you add a sound effect, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's great, this food is good. The food is the same. But the airplane noise and the flying motions, it made a difference for that kid, for that person. And so he does that. And the men see people like them using shopping carts, the women, the younger people. And the idea takes off. It was good when he first thought about it. It was good when he put them by the doors. It was good when he brought them up to the people. But that's what made it take off. What made it take off wasn't the idea being good, but him taking the time to make himself a student of humanity and understanding the story that other people were telling themselves. And then he was able to achieve influence and he was able to build a legacy. Reminds me of the great and late Zig Ziglar, who said, the best way to get what you want is to help other people get what they want. And the real reward of that is not getting what you want, but the person that you become through the process of taking the time to really understand what other people want beyond the resistance that they initially display to you when you try to influence them. This isn't just a story about entrepreneurship. This isn't just a story about creating a product or marketing an idea or creating wealth. This is a story about freedom of expression. Because freedom of speech, freedom of expression isn't just about the words I use. It isn't just about my right to debate you or my right to disagree with you or my right to say no or my right to say boo or my right to say this guy's wrong or my right to write an angry article or an angry YouTube video. I'm here for all of that too. But it's also about our ability to use our talents and our gifts to express our creativity in ways that incentivize people to behave differently, even beyond their consciously held beliefs. So many of the major changes that have happened in society that have led to more freedom and led to more flourishing have not happened as a result of there being some mass shift in consciousness where the majority of people woke up one day to some compelling intellectual argument. I'm here for all the arguments too. That's really valuable. I'm all about that. But changes happen when we alter the incentives. We can try to change the way people see the world, but we can also think entrepreneurially, and we can change the world that people see. And when we change the world that people see, they begin to engage that world differently. And through that engagement, they also acquire a new way of seeing. Because belief formation isn't just the product of what we intellectually work out. Belief formation is also the product of what we practice. The activities that we participate in, the things that we show up and do every day begin to shape our consciousness in ways that alters how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and ultimately how we treat others. And that's a power that we have. You know, you think about how maybe you or your children our own social media, most of them have not been argued into that behavior. They have been incentivized into it by someone who has figured out how to compel their attention. But as a result of being incentivized into it, they are now subject to a whole range of influences that actually do shape their ideology. We have far more power, far more influence than we think, but we have to resist the temptation to be self-righteous and to give up on people. Ram Dass once said, you can be right without being righteous about it. And this is really hard because it's tempting because it lets us off the hook. But the most difficult thing in life is to love another human being. Because there is nothing like love that challenges to the core our selfishness. Love requires sacrifice and generosity and self-giving and humility. And that's just incredibly difficult. But this isn't about being a goody two-shoe. This isn't about being a nice person for the sake of being nice. This isn't about, never offend anybody. This is actually about not using niceties, not using political correctness, not using relativism, not using arrogance, not using retreating into my little tribes as an excuse to do the hard work of being lovingly, respectfully honest. Hey man, I love the hell out of you, but I gotta let you know I don't appreciate what you did the other day. Hey, you're my brother, man, and I'd do anything for you. But if you ever do something like that again, you're done here. You understand? Hey, I don't know how to say this because I don't want to get into an argument about anything, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that what just happened a few minutes ago, it really bothers me. It just really bothers me. And I got to do some thinking about what I think the proper response to that should be, but I got to let you know I'm not happy with that. That's hard stuff right there. That's heavy stuff right there. Well, hey, look, I disagree with your choice. I love you. We can still be friends, but I disagree with that choice. Or hey, I'm worried about you. Or hey, the other day I said this and I did some thinking about it. And I was wrong. I apologize. Those types of conversations, that's where the freedom is. And so TK, what is this? I get how you can shoehorn that into the topic of freedom of expression. I kind of sort of get that. But what the heck does that have to do with fighting for this civil liberty that we call freedom of expression? Well, here it is. If you can put down the picket fence for 2 seconds, if you can pause the voting discussion for 2 seconds, if you can pause the conversations around who did best at the recent debate for 2 seconds, there's another way that we can fight for our freedom. And it doesn't involve waiting on politicians to save us. It doesn't involve waiting on the right person to come along who's going to do all the right things. There's an additional way that we can fight for freedom. The best way to fight for freedom is to actually use and enjoy the freedoms that you have while you have them. Because the moment you stop using the freedom because you're afraid of it, it becomes incredibly easy and just a matter of time for someone to come along, take it away. Cherish your freedom to disagree. Cherish your freedom to say what you think. Cherish your freedom to put your convictions and your ideas not only into words, but into art, into actions, into your labor, into the way you show up for other people. Use that freedom. Use that freedom to participate in difficult discussions. Use that freedom to learn about other people. Use that freedom to figure out how you can collaborate with others on the basis of a common ground to make the things that need to happen, happen. Not because you're trying to impress anybody, but because you're willing to go through the pain that it takes to change the world. I once heard someone say that a champion is someone who's willing to do what he hates in order to create what he loves. What is the kind of world that you love? Are you willing to participate, not only in conversations that you previously hated, but are you willing to participate in conversations with people that you hate, or people that you have defined as hateful, for the sake of creating what you love? I hope you've got some ideas, some tools that can at least motivate you to consider that possibility a little further and to contemplate what that might look like in your life. Thank you. So now is the most important part, and that is the part where we can talk together and we open up for Q&A. And you can ask whatever you like. It can be about anything that I've talked about. It can be about something you're struggling with, something that you're thinking about, something you want to challenge me on, whatever it may be. Nothing's off limits, because if I don't know the answer, I'll just be honest about that.
So,
Yes.
I'm gonna ask you, how do
in order to get the questions recorded, it's best if we operate from the mic.
Okay.
Because then on the replay, the question will be clear.
If that's all right with you all, that's fine with me.
Great, okay.
Unless people want to line up.
Thank you, that was very insightful. How do you reconcile being kind versus being right? Because we're taught as I have a neighbor that may be 96 years old, babbling about all kinds of things I disagree with, and at times I do not correct him just because I think it's probably going to hurt his feeling more than it is I'm going to fix his opinion on it.
Sure, yeah. So I think the distinction to look for is the distinction between being discerning and being right, because kindness is not always what's needed. There are moments in life where what's needed is firmness and assertiveness, seriousness, and sobriety. Those moments are real. Those moments exist. And so I don't believe in kindness for kindness' sake. I believe that we should not be unnecessarily mean or arbitrarily mean, but we also should not be mindlessly kind. It's okay to be serious, because there are some things that are serious, and there are some forms of news that need to be delivered in serious, straightforward terms. But with that being said, what I would say is being discerning is about recognizing the situation that I'm in, perceiving what the goal of the conversation is, what is the purpose of our interaction, and choosing a way of communicating with that person that satisfies that. And so, whereas I might correct one person who says a thing in a certain situation, I might let it slide with another person in a different situation. Because what's my environment? Do I have time to really get into it, talk right now? Do I know other things about this person that lets me know they are or are not debating in good faith? Do I know certain things about them that tell me that they are not of the level of cognitive ability to receive what I'm saying, or they're in an emotional state where they're closed to what I'm saying? There are all kinds of situations where it just makes sense to not preach to someone, to not give them advice, to not tell them what you think, because you can discern based on other facets of your interaction with them, their history, their body language, their tone, other things they're telling you, that what they might need in that moment is just to be heard. Or what they might need in that moment is, just to have a sounding board. And one of the greatest mistakes we can make is the mistake of thinking that by listening to someone without slam dunking on them with philosophical arguments, giving a counterpoint to everything they say, that we're misrepresenting what we believe, or we're letting the universe get away with proliferating error. And that's not true. Because sometimes the trust that we earn, the respect that we earn, by showing up and listening to a person and exhibiting the confidence of someone that isn't threatened by that person's ideas, you diffuse so much negative energy, and you get the opportunity at a future moment to be the person they come to and ask a question. There's so many situations I've experienced in my life and other people's lives where somebody who I never thought would listen to what I had to say would be like, hey man, I'd love to know what you think about this thing. I'm like, really? I'm shocked. But it was just because the previous 4 times I might have been the one person to listen and not give them a bunch of counter arguments for everything they said. So it's about discerning what's going on in the conversation. You know what I mean? It's similar to what everybody who's married already understands. Sometimes when your spouse complains to you, they're not looking for a solution, right?
TK, good, first of all, good conversation this morning. TK,
Where you at?
right over here.
All right.
Good job this morning on the morning show. Nicole and I interviewed you.
Hey, wait a minute. What's up, guys? It's so good to see y'all.
We're the ones who asked you those questions.
My daughter goes to school here.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned it
Oh,
earlier,
man.
I was like, oh, great, I can just figure out from school and come.
I had no idea you guys would be here. I'm so happy. Give these two a hand. Man.
I think, well, you were that impressive, and I think that important to the discourse we're having around conversations and the inability to come together around conversations.
Yeah.
My mother taught me that conversations were sacred. Even if you disagree, especially if you put in the effort to have that conversation, you should be respectful. We seem to have lost that. But one of the difficulties I see is that having friends from different communities, and especially being someone who's public, when you talk to them, they'll tell you about everybody they talk to. And then you'll tell them about, well, everybody I talk to sees the world differently and has a different opinion. And then there's a roadblock around that conversation because they really truly believe that their world is everybody they spoke to, because they're never around the other everybody that I talk to, we talk to. How do we move beyond that?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a very challenging question. And that's another one of those things that's incredibly frustrating too, right? When you talk to someone who has a very limited, narrow view of the world, that's one thing. But when they think their limited, narrow view is highly enlightened and expanded, that's another thing. It's like we talked about this morning, Harriet Tubman talked about how in her lifetime she freed many slaves, but she could have freed so many more if they had only known they were slaves. And so we could say the same thing about opening minds. Like, man, we can open so many more minds if those minds only know that they're closed. But the paradox of a closed mind is that it's too closed to realize that it's closed. And that's pretty difficult to deal with. So I think the best answers are often the most disappointing answers, which is why they aren't always politically useful. Because what people want are catchphrases and slogans that make them feel good about very complex problems, when a lot of the solutions that work require you to show up and do things consistently that are difficult. It's kind of like the Karate Kid, where he runs to the teacher and he just wants to learn some moves so that he can defeat the bullies. He's tired of the bullies, he just wants to learn karate so he can break these guys down. And the teacher's like, all right, cool, you want to learn karate? All right, paint the garage. What? Paint the garage? Okay, maybe I'll put up with this guy so I can eventually get to some karate lessons. And you paint the garage and you come back, he's like, okay, you done with that? Wash the car. Hey man, look, I'm trying to learn karate. Wash the car. Right? And you're doing all these different things. And what the kid doesn't understand is the process of doing these things is what develops the discipline and the mindset, the self-control, the patience that's going to be necessary to be able to do the karate thing so well that by the time he has the ability to knock someone out, it's the last thing that he wants to do because he realizes that it's bigger than that. And what began as a little boy who just wants to get revenge on the bullies ends as someone who has found another way and will only use that in the most extreme cases. But bringing that back around, I think one of the ways we influence people is when we are having these conversations, we kind of use a Socratic method where instead of telling them that that's not happening, or being like, well, here's the way I see it, or here are the people that I'm talking to, we ask them some questions that get them to open up within their assumptions. So for instance, someone says something, you can dress up a lot of things in terms of hypotheticals. You can say, so what would you say to someone who said this? Do you believe there are people out there that have ever experienced this? What if I told you about someone who said the opposite? And something that I found to be really helpful with people is when you can bring it out of the abstract and you can give them concrete examples that they relate to. So one of the reasons why celebrity gossip is so prominent It's partially because, all the scandalous things we want to say about our dark side, but there's another very rational reason why celebrity gossip is so prominent, and it's because unlike my uncle, or unlike your uncle, we have celebrities in common. And because we want to connect with one another over interesting things, even sometimes the scandalous, dramatic things, we can't do that by me talking about the people in my family and you talking about the people in yours, unless we're already friends. But when it comes to celebrities, any one of us, we've all heard of LeBron James and we've all heard of Pope Francis. And so we can talk about them. And so if you can find examples in popular culture and in history or real news stories where people have experienced something different and you can share that with them, it makes it concrete, because people tend to be mistrusting in these types of conversations, and you say, well, the people I'm talking to in Chicago, they're totally afraid of what you're saying isn't a problem. Well, it's your word against theirs. But when you can say, so what do you think of this? Just last week, over Navy Pier, there were gang shootings, and it got so bad, and you can go ahead and check this out and read about it in the paper, that the Chicago Bears organization had to initiate some conversations with the gangs about figuring out a way that they can work together. Can you stop the shootings, this and that? So what do you think about that situation? If you're in Chicago, how are you feeling about that? Right? If you can give somebody something real, what it does is it wakes them up to actual experiences, and it's no longer a matter of well, I'm having different conversations than you, or you're not having conversations with the right people. What about this specific thing from history? What about this specific thing from pop culture? What about this specific thing from the news? Let me give it back to you, because I want to make sure I'm addressing what you're talking about and I'm getting somewhere. Is that touching on it?
No, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
James.
Thank you, TK. You're an amazing storyteller. I'm curious about when persuading someone your style and how you go about connecting with someone. Do you go about it through pure logic, or it seems like more storytelling, trying to relate to their kind of common understanding? And if you could just talk a little bit about that, persuasion.
Sure. So I first want to make a distinction between performative debate and personal discussion, because the rules of the game change. Right? When you're on a show or doing a public debate and you're going back and forth with someone, you kind of got the job of having to be entertaining, of making sure you involve the audience. I think about a conversation that I just had. It's a different type of vibe than what we usually do on The Minimalist, but we had a debate with Destiny on our show, who's like the most popular YouTube debater. And on the private podcast, this is the only place you'll hear this part, but there's this point where me and Destiny were having so much fun. We're getting like deep into the weeds. We're like so deep into the weeds. At one point, my co-host Josh says, hey, guys, I gotta consider the audience. Like you two nerds are way out in left field right now. You guys gotta do that in the coffee shop. Let's bring it back, right? So when you're having a performative debate, there are certain considerations that have to be kind of baked into the discussion. But if it's a personal conversation, and this isn't about an audience, and this isn't about, time constraints with a podcast or something like that, I think the first thing is to understand that curiosity isn't just a way of winning trust. It isn't just a matter of establishing rapport, but curiosity is your greatest asset if you really want to have persuasion. Because it's easy to go into a conversation thinking that because we have an idea they need to hear, that that's all that's required. But as we see from the Sylvan Goldman story, or your input on the Magic Penny story, it's not just about the idea, it's about the framing. Everyone needs ideas to be presented to them in a certain type of frame. That's why an experience we often have, and in fact, as parents, you know this, like as parents, you understand that there are some things you can tell your children and they won't listen to you, but another person that they accept as cool can tell them the same thing, might not even be as well worded or with compassion behind it like you have, and your kids will listen to them right away. That's a fact of humanity. There are some things we're more likely to accept as true because of the person that says it to us or the way that they said it. So the frame that you use for delivering ideas is going to vary from person to person. Some people won't even accept what you say just because the type of analogy that you use. They just don't like your metaphors. They don't like your stories. They don't like certain buzzwords you employ. And so curiosity saves you time. The more time you spend asking questions and listening to someone, the fewer words you will have to speak when it becomes your time to talk. And the few things that you say will cut right to the core, and they will be more compelling because you've done your digging. It reminds me of my financial advising days. We were coached on listen to the client. Don't make any investment suggestions. Don't you talk about any of that. Ask them, what's your retirement dream looking like? What age would you like to retire? You know, ask them a whole bunch of questions about quality of life and things along those lines. And the more questions you ask, by the time you get to your time to speak, it's pretty easy. It's like, okay, so based on what you said, I'm thinking that it would be best if we took this kind of approach with this level of risk and so on, these considerations in play. And they will listen to you because you've done the work of listening to them, and they will be more likely to trust what you say because they know it's not just a reaction to you making judgments about their life, but it's a reaction to you listening empathetically. So curiosity doesn't just build rapport, it gives you the knowledge. Never assume that just because you know something that they need to know, that you understand the frame with which it needs to be delivered in order to be effective. So that's, I would say that part is critical. Also asking people for permission to challenge them. I don't think that's absurd at all. Hey, would you mind if I played devil's advocate with that? And if somebody says no, sure, you can get mad at that. Sure, you can look at that as closed-minded, but you just save time. Because if a person is honest enough to say no, that they're not in a place where they want to hear you, you just spared you and them a very resentful experience. And you can save it for another time. You know what I'm saying? Those would be a couple of things that, yeah.
Thank you, TK. We're right at time.
Okay.
I think I need to make a couple of comments because the energy that this man just displayed is hard to comprehend. He started his morning, he's from LA, so he trucked here last night. He was 2 hours. He had his first show this morning, Oliver, with you at 7:20. He was up with an activity before that. And then he had 3 or 4 sessions today, and then he stood there and spoke for this time. I think Superman is probably closest to what I can describe. I'm grateful that we don't have any speakers following you, TK, because I think they would be leaving. So thanks so much. This was fabulous, and thanks everybody for coming. And thanks for the people who are watching it on Facebook. Thanks so much.
Also, I'll be hanging back for about 10 minutes or so. So if anybody wants to continue with any questions and so on, I'm here. Just come up here and stay.